Religion often claims it's under attack, from skeptics, from atheists, from people who don't believe anymore. But that's not the real threat. Because if you look closely, religion doesn't fear mockery. It doesn't fear doubt. It fears something far quieter. Science. Not because science insults faith, but because science does something far more dangerous. It asks questions and refuses to stop when the answers get uncomfortable. And once you see why religion reacts so defensively to discovery, you'll never hear the phrase, faith versus science, the same way again. The wrong enemy. For centuries, religion has pointed outward and chosen an enemy it knows how to fight. The skeptics, the doubters, the ones who ask uncomfortable questions and refuse to bow their heads. They are labeled as blasphemers, heretics, people who lost their way, and that framing works because it creates a simple story: us versus them, faith versus disbelief, order versus chaos. Skeptics are easy to dismiss. You can attack their character instead of their arguments. You can call them immoral, arrogant, spiritually empty, or broken in some invisible way. You can say their doubts come from bitterness or rebellion, not reason. Once you do that, you never have to engage with what they are actually saying. The threat feels manageable, even theatrical. A villain you can name, but science does not behave like a villain. Science does not shout. It does not mock sacred texts. It does not stand outside belief systems and throw stones. Science does something far more unsettling. It stays calm. It observes. It measures. It checks again, and then it publishes the results without asking permission. That is where the dynamic changes completely. Belief systems are often built to survive debate, because debate can be controlled. You can decide which questions are allowed and which are forbidden. You can end the conversation by appealing to authority, tradition, or mystery. But rulers, microscopes, and telescopes do not respect boundaries like that. They do not care what you hoped was true. They only reveal what appears to be real. Belief systems are not designed to withstand tools that keep asking questions long after humans would prefer to stop. They are built to withstand questions that end at the right time. Questions that pause just before the foundation starts to crack. But science does not pause. When questions continue, when measurement replaces interpretation, and when observation refuses to bend to doctrine, something deeper is threatened. Not belief itself, but control over the narrative of reality. That is the moment fear appears. Not loud panic, but quiet resistance. The kind that reframes curiosity as danger and certainty as virtue. Because once questions do not stop, belief no longer decides where truth ends. And that changes everything. Faith needs certainty, science needs none. Religion survives on certainty. Clear answers that feel solid under your feet. Fixed truths that do not shift with time or evidence. Final explanations that promise relief from doubt. Certainty is not just a feature of faith, it is the emotional engine that keeps it running. When the world feels chaotic, certainty feels like safety. Science runs on the opposite fuel. I don't know yet. That single sentence is more destabilizing than any skeptic ever could be. Not because it sounds rebellious, but because it refuses to close the door. Faith tells you the story is finished, the meaning already decided, the conclusion sealed. Science insists the story is provisional, always open to revision, always subject to new information. And that difference is not philosophical, it is psychological. Certainty calms anxiety. It tells you where you stand, who you are, and why things happen. Uncertainty does the opposite. It keeps the mind alert, uncomfortable, slightly exposed. Science does not promise comfort. It promises honesty, even when honesty creates tension. Every time science updates its understanding, something subtle happens. It does not just correct a fact. It reveals a deeper truth that belief systems struggle to face. Confidence does not equal truth. Feeling sure does not make something real. Being repeated for centuries does not make an idea immune to revision. That realization is unsettling, especially when certainty is not just comforting but foundational. When morality, identity, purpose, and authority are built on fixed answers, The idea that knowledge evolves can feel like erosion, not of facts, but of meaning itself. From the inside, this can feel like chaos. If the answers change, what do you hold on to? If the story is unfinished, where do you stand? Faith often responds by doubling down, not because it hates discovery, but because it fears the ground moving beneath it. But this tension did not begin with laboratories or equations. It began long before journals and peer review. It began the moment humans looked up at the sky and tried to explain what they saw. The stars demanded meaning, but they also demanded explanation. One path offered certainty. The other offered curiosity. And once curiosity takes root, certainty is never quite as stable again. When the sky stopped revolving around us, for most of human history, the universe felt orderly in a very comforting way. The earth was the center. The heavens revolved around us. The sun rose for us, the stars circled for us, and everything above seemed arranged with human life in mind. This was not just astronomy, it was reassurance. It told humanity that it mattered, that existence was not random, and that we were positioned at the heart of creation for a reason. Then science adjusted the lens. Slowly, carefully, without drama, the picture changed. Earth was no longer the center. The sun did not orbit us. We were not the anchor of the cosmos. We were a planet moving around a star, inside a galaxy filled with stars, inside a universe that did not appear to notice us at all. What once felt intimate suddenly felt vast. What once felt personal now felt indifferent. That shift was not merely a correction of facts, it was a psychological wound. Because many religious stories were never only about gods or laws or rituals. They were about placement, about meaning, about being chosen, central, watched. When the universe revolved around humanity, it reinforced the idea that humans were the point of the story. That existence itself had arranged the stage for us. Science did not mock this belief. It did something more unsettling. It reduced it. Not by argument, but by scale, by distance, by numbers so large they dissolved intuition. When you learn that there are billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars, something quietly collapses inside the old narrative. Not necessarily belief in a god, but belief in guaranteed significance. And shrinking a story can feel like an attack, even when it is true, especially when that story once made suffering feel meaningful and life feel guided. To be told you are not the center does not just challenge theology, it challenges identity. The danger was not that humans felt smaller, the danger was what followed. If we are not cosmically central, then authority no longer comes from position, meaning no longer arrives automatically. It has to be examined, chosen, or created. And once that realization settles in, belief systems face a new problem. Not disbelief, but perspective. Because when the sky stops revolving around us, questions begin revolving inward. And that is where the real unease starts to grow. Miracles don't survive explanations. A miracle feels powerful only as long as it remains unexplained. The moment an explanation appears, the emotional charge begins to fade. What once inspired awe slowly becomes understandable, predictable, even ordinary. That shift does not feel neutral to belief systems that rely on mystery. It feels like loss. There was a time when thunder sounded like divine anger echoing across the sky. Disease was not a biological process but a moral verdict. Eclipses were not celestial mechanics but warnings, omens, messages sent from beyond. These interpretations did not exist because people were foolish. They existed because humans needed meaning before they had understanding. Science did not arrive to mock these beliefs or humiliate the people who held them. It did something quieter and far more disruptive. It replaced stories with mechanisms, pressure systems instead of wrath, bacteria instead of punishment, orbits instead of prophecy, no drama, no judgment, just cause and effect laid bare. And with every explanation, something subtle happens. A layer of mystery that religion once owned is gently peeled away, not ripped off, not attacked, just rendered unnecessary. The world becomes less enchanted, but more coherent. Less personal, but more reliable. This is often misunderstood as science trying to destroy wonder. In reality, science is driven by a different kind of awe. The awe of understanding how something works, rather than why it was sent. But that distinction matters deeply to systems built on mystery as authority. When mystery shrinks, authority often shrinks with it. If thunder is no longer a warning, fear loses its leverage. If disease is no longer punishment, guilt loses its grip. If eclipses are predictable, obedience no longer feels like survival. Because fear-based obedience depends on unpredictability. It depends on the idea that unseen forces are watching, judging, and intervening at will. Discoverable laws undermine that fear. They suggest a universe that operates consistently, whether anyone is watching or not. And that is terrifying to systems built on unquestioned power. Not because explanations remove meaning, but because they remove dependence. When people understand the world, they no longer need to be controlled by it. Questions are contagious. Skeptics tend to question answers. They challenge conclusions, interpretations, and claims. That can be uncomfortable, but it is familiar. Belief systems have learned how to respond to that kind of challenge. They debate, they defend, they redirect. But science questions something far more dangerous. It questions methods. That difference matters. When someone questions an answer, the argument stays contained. You can argue back. You can reinterpret the text. You can appeal to tradition or authority. But when someone learns to question how answers are produced in the first place, the scope changes entirely. The skill does not stay in one area of life. Once someone learns how to question, they do not stop at religion. They question leaders and the reasons given for power. They question traditions and whether age alone makes something true. They question moral rules and ask who benefits from them. They question social hierarchies and wonder why some voices are treated as sacred while others are dismissed. Science teaches a habit of mind that quietly rewires how people think. Show me the evidence. Show me how you know. Show me that this works not just once, but repeatedly. It is not aggressive. It does not announce itself as rebellion. It feels reasonable, calm, almost polite. And that is why it spreads so effectively. This habit does not shout slogans or tear down statues. It simply asks again and again and again. Each question builds on the last, not out of hostility, but out of consistency. If evidence matters here, why would it not matter there? If methods matter in understanding nature, why would they not matter in understanding authority? Belief systems that rely on, because we said so, can survive doubt for a long time. Doubt can be framed as weakness or temptation. But they cannot survive a culture trained to examine processes rather than accept proclamations. Over time, unquestioned claims begin to look fragile. And here is the irony. This kind of questioning does not begin with distrust. It begins with curiosity, the desire to understand how something works. But once that door opens, it rarely closes where belief systems hope it will. Because methods, once questioned, never feel sacred again. Religion benefited from science until it didn't. Religion did not begin as an enemy of science. In fact, for much of history, it benefited from it. Scientific observation was welcomed when it strengthened the story and reinforced authority. Calendars helped mark sacred days. Architecture turned belief into stone and sky-reaching monuments. Medicine eased suffering while prayers framed the cure. Navigation expanded influence, trade, and missionary reach. Discovery was not a problem when it served meaning. Science was allowed in the room as long as it knew its place. As long as it helped organize time, build temples, heal bodies, or chart journeys, it was seen as a tool of divine order. Knowledge was framed as something granted, not questioned. Useful, but contained. Helpful, but subordinate. The tension appeared the moment discovery crossed a line. When observation began to contradict doctrine, instead of decorating it. When evidence pointed somewhere the story did not want to go. That is when science quietly transformed from assistant to threat. Not because it was loud, not because it was disrespectful, but because it refused to submit. Science does not adjust its conclusions to preserve authority. It adjusts them to fit reality. That single principle is intolerable to systems built on unchallengeable truth. When scripture says one thing and observation says another, science does not negotiate. It documents, it repeats, it refines, and then it moves forward. This is the real conflict. It is not belief versus disbelief. It is not faith versus atheism. It is authority versus inquiry. Authority demands loyalty first and understanding second. Inquiry demands understanding first, even if loyalty dissolves in the process. One insists on being right. The other insists on being accurate. And here is the crucial difference. Authority resists correction because correction weakens control. Inquiry depends on correction because correction strengthens knowledge. One freezes its conclusions to survive. The other survives by changing its conclusions. Only one of these can adapt when proven wrong. Only one can say, without collapsing, "We were mistaken, and now we know more." And that difference explains why cooperation lasted only as long as science stayed obedient. The moment it stopped kneeling, it became dangerous. Why skeptics are less scary than data. A skeptic can be ignored, labeled, dismissed. You can question their motives, attack their character, or frame them as hostile outsiders who never truly understood the belief they criticize. Skeptics come with faces, opinions, and emotions, and that makes them manageable. You can turn them into a symbol and move on. Data does not allow that. A skeptic argues from the outside, pointing at contradictions and inconsistencies. Science dismantles from within. It does not need to confront belief directly. It simply examines the world the belief claims to describe and checks whether the description matches what can be observed. Science uses observation to see what actually happens. It uses prediction to test whether an idea can anticipate reality. It uses replication to see whether the result holds up when no one is watching and no authority is present. There is no anger in this process, no intention to offend, no desire to win an argument, only results. And results do not care how sacred a belief feels. They do not respond to prayer, tradition, or emotional attachment. They either hold up under scrutiny, or they quietly fail. There is no debate stage, no rhetorical flourish, just the slow accumulation of evidence pointing in one direction or another. This is what makes data so unsettling. You cannot accuse it of bias in the same way you accuse a person. You cannot shame it into silence. You cannot excommunicate a measurement or threaten a pattern into disappearing. Data does not rebel, it persists. And when a belief collapses under evidence, something deeply uncomfortable happens. There is no villain to blame, no enemy to condemn, no skeptic to exile. The collapse does not come from malice. It comes from reality refusing to cooperate with the story. That confrontation is far more frightening than disagreement. Disagreement implies choice. Reality does not. It simply stands there, indifferent, waiting to be acknowledged. And facing that indifference means facing the possibility that a belief did not fail because it was attacked, but because it was never supported to begin with. What this means for us. This is not about hating religion or glorifying science as some flawless replacement. Framing it that way misses the deeper point. This is about understanding fear and where it comes from. Not loud fear, but the quiet kind that resists change while pretending to defend truth. Religion does not fear skeptics simply because skeptics doubt. Doubt can be managed, redirected, even ritualized. What it fears is something that does not stay still. Science does not settle. It outgrows. It keeps moving forward, keeps refining its understanding, keeps uncovering truths that are sometimes inconvenient, sometimes unsettling, and sometimes deeply uncomfortable. And science does not hoard that process. It invites us into it. It invites us to question our assumptions, not just about the universe, but about ourselves. To ask whether what feels true is actually true. To examine why certain ideas feel threatening when challenged. To notice the difference between meaning and certainty. This is not an invitation to replace wonder with cold logic. That is a common fear, but it misunderstands what understanding does. Grounding wonder in reality does not make the world smaller. It often makes it larger. It transforms mystery from something imposed on us into something we actively explore. Awe does not disappear when explanations arrive. It evolves. The strongest ideas are not the ones locked behind protection. They are not shielded from questions or preserved by authority. They are the ones that can survive exposure. The ones that can be examined, tested, and revised without collapsing. Ideas that cannot be questioned require obedience to exist. Ideas that can be questioned earn understanding. And for us, this means choosing courage over comfort, choosing curiosity over certainty, not because questioning makes us superior, but because it makes us honest. When we stop fearing questions, we stop needing someone else to tell us where truth ends. And that is where real intellectual freedom begins. When you zoom out, this story is not really about religion or science at all. It is about human psychology, our craving for certainty, our fear of being wrong, our discomfort with the idea that we might not be central to the story. Certainty feels safe, it feels grounding, it tells us who we are and where we stand. Science humbles us. It reminds us that knowledge is provisional and that understanding grows through revision. Religion often reassures us by offering fixed meaning and final answers. And when reassurance depends on remaining unquestioned, curiosity naturally becomes a threat. But progress has always come from the same place, from people willing to pause and ask a dangerous question. What if this is not the whole truth? Not to tear meaning apart, but to discover something deeper and more resilient than certainty alone. So do not fear questions, do not fear uncertainty, and do not mistake comfort for truth. Growth rarely feels safe at first, but it expands what we are capable of understanding. If this made you think differently about belief, authority, or knowledge, stay curious. And if you value truth over comfort, subscribe.